Right after college, I was trying to build my first company called Social Boston Sports from the ground up. No team, no budget, no playbook, just a lot of hustle and absolutely no idea how to get people to pay attention. And I had a friend helping me figure out PR, not agency PR, but real PR. How to tell the story, how to pitch the right people, how to get press that actually mattered. And we landed coverage in the Boston Globe and Daily Candy, which at the time was one of the most read newsletters in the city of Boston. That stuff moved the needle for our business. And I learned more about how brand and story actually worked in those few months than I had in 4 years of college prior. So that friend is my guest today. And in the years since we were cold pitching Boston journalists together, she went on to run award-winning marketing and PR programs for Dunkin Donuts, TripAdvisor, and Sprinklr. She's written 2 best-selling books, The Power of Visual Storytelling and The Laws of Brand Storytelling. And she founded her own consultancy. She's become a keynote speaker on many stages around the world and built one of the most credible personal brands in marketing without ever chasing it. My guest, Jessica, is someone who's understood before most people did that your personal brand isn't what you say it is. It's what you've consistently shown, delivered, and stood for over time. So today we're talking about exactly that, what personal brand actually is, how it compounds, and what she tells the companies she works with today. This is Return on Reputation. Let's go. Jess, welcome to the show. I am so excited. Thanks for being here. Tell us like what's going on in your world right now.
Yeah. I know it's interesting. We just had International Women's Day this week, I guess Sunday, but this week has been a wave of International Women's Day celebrations. And I was invited up to Birmingham in the UK. So I live in London now, a little bit further away from our days in Boston, right?
Yeah.
And that was one of my biggest...
a citizen.
I've become a British citizen. I've been here, it's
so
my
cool.
11th year here, which is wild. And yeah, it was interesting working on this speech for Accenture. They wanted me to come and speak about my career under the theme of reinvention. And when I actually went through chapter by chapter, job by job, I realized, wow, when you think about the career ladder, I haven't always thought about the career ladder in a traditional way. I've always led a bit with my intuition and what really pulls me towards things. In the first job, we had an incident in 2006. So I started working in 2005 and a technician fell asleep on a customer where it was like pictures of the tech sleeping on the couch with like his couch in Washington, DC. And the customer filmed it. And he's like snoring on the couch, and they put it on YouTube. And if you actually want to laugh because you make incredible production with the video work that you do, 2006 YouTube was a situation in terms of shaky, not so great video. But he made this very sarcastic video. Thanks for nothing, Comcast, like 2 broken routers, missed appointments, hours of time on customer support, thanks for nothing. It was just the guy sleeping. The video went totally viral. And at the time,
I'm sure
companies weren't on social media. We went to school in the Boston area. I got early access to Facebook because Mark Zuckerberg started it down the road at Harvard. Companies weren't on these channels at that time. So for a video to go viral on YouTube, become a completely global news story, I woke up and said, wow, okay, from a corporate reputation standpoint, we have to care about these channels. But then it sparked this, what would be a 20-year curiosity and random career path around what else could we do with them? Could we do positive things? Could we market ourselves? Could we build communities on them? Could we tell stories about our business? And that, to me, I think set the early tone. Now, I was working in public relations, as you mentioned, because in my second job, I was at State Street. And candidly, I had thought I could go and do anything, but I didn't really love corporate institutional finance. I mean, I was just so excited to work for a global company, and I wanted to move overseas at some point. That was always on my bucket list. But I learned that the subject matter and what you're really deeply passionate about, I'm much better at. So I started looking for things I could do on the side. And back in 2006, I had started my travel and lifestyle blog, The Savvy Bostonian. Yep. So that was going when I was getting interest and attention from different companies. So Clarins, which is a cosmetic brand, they would invite me to like their new preview for the new lipsticks they launched. And I would come home with a couple free lipsticks. And I'm like, this is great.
You were an
And then
influencer before influencer marketing.
I know, but no one made money off of influencing back then. You were just like, ooh, free lipstick. I got to do yoga on the field at Fenway Park with Kind, the snack bars.
Sure.
And I
Yeah, yeah.
thought, these are experiences I wouldn't have otherwise. And then somehow I heard about what you were doing through, I think, that world. And then that's where I also got excited on, hey, I could do some volunteering for Justin because I know about PR. He's growing a business. He has a great story to tell. And I think, to help the growth of your business, getting covered in news outlets would help on multiple levels. It would help you reach new customers. It
Yeah.
would give you authority from, hey, if the Boston Globe covers you, it's giving you that credibility there.
Yep.
So I was looking for ways maybe I could get some experience outside of work, which is always one thing I tell people is listen to the things that pull you because you never know where it's going to take you. And then yes, I was getting some more consumer PR experience there, but I also had this blog, and then I got recruited to TripAdvisor, and then it also helped me get the job at Dunkin because they wanted to run corporate blogs. So isn't that
Mhm.
wild that I was
That's
just
amazing.
writing about restaurants and things to do in Boston and lipstick, and then it translated into
It's
helping my
incredible.
career path. Yeah, it's
It's
wild.
awesome. And you've always, so I think with Savvy Bostonian, whether in my mind, I don't know if you were intentional about this, but I look at it as like a personal brand move. You're out
Definitely.
there, you're building yourself up as a brand. And most recently, you've started with Savvy Media and Marketing as your own consultancy, global consultancy that you're working on. I guess two questions. Was it hard to walk away from the corporate world and go all in on yourself? And then from the personal branding piece, how is that? You just mentioned it a little bit, but how do you view yourself, like Jessica Gioglio, as a brand versus as a professional?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So, to answer your question, was it hard to step away from the corporate world? I would say yes, yes and no. I mean, I finished at Nokia after 7 years. I took a voluntary redundancy, which is a way of saying layoff in the US, because the company was restructuring and it was just, hey, end of the month, you're out, you get maybe 2 weeks to a month pay kind of thing, and you're done. So I had a little bit of financial security to help me take the leap. And I don't want to pretend to
That
people,
helps.
just quit your job and you're going to immediately figure it out. Because when you leave the corporate world, you have to pitch yourself. You have to go for it. And yes, we pitch ourselves when we apply for jobs and go for opportunities, but we know that there's a job there. So when you go into more freelance life, you do need to go out to a lot of networking events. You need to build a strong personal brand online, and you need to create a series of ways for opportunities to come to you or to get introductions for the opportunity. So I looked at it full flow in kind of a circular way where, yes, I've always been building a brand online. I might say that the travel blog is probably not the thing that translate. I mean, at the time, the moving to doing corporate blogs was a really unique thing that I didn't realize my travel blog would do. And the skills that I was building with the personal blog was, okay, I'm learning about search engine optimization. I'm learning about how to bring traffic to a website. I'm learning about storytelling and community building, and how I've always looked at things like my blog. And now I have a YouTube that goes with it too, and I'm monetized on YouTube. But I look at my side things as a test bed to influence my skill set in marketing. So I'll give you an example. I was most recently doing a 6-month contract with a consumer appliances company here in the UK. And we were in a conference room having conversations about TikTok and creators and affiliates. And the folks in the room were not happy with some of the folks that were affiliates. And what I had to educate them on, because I'm on TikTok, because I have over 500 followers, I was able to educate them and say, well, anyone who has over 500 followers can be a TikTok creator, can review any product and get affiliate commission on it. We can't always pick the ones, but what we can do is reach out to them if perhaps the brand, if they're saying things that are not true or not correct about a product, we should create a resourcing stream to reach out to them and educate them. But it's because, you're this hands-on practitioner. So that's one piece. But then the second piece is building that personal brand online, which I know is work that you're doing a lot of right now. This is a way that you also can attract people to you, because say you're at a networking event or a business event and you meet someone and they say, yeah, I could use some marketing help. they're going to go and look you up online. They're going to look you up on LinkedIn. It's good to see that you're posting about things, that you have a point of view, that you have a good website. You don't have to go crazy with, spamming the internet with content, but say you just do a post every week or two on LinkedIn, you're consistent in your thought leadership and what you stand for, kind of work that you do. That's going to give you that credibility when someone comes to hire you and make them feel more confident in making that investment decision in you.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think if you're an individual listening and you're looking for career security, if that exists today, I think personal brand is probably the number one way to build that for yourself.
Yes. That's the other point too, is I know this is a cheeky thing and you have to look at your employment contract if you are at a company, but I do think building things on the side where even if it's small amounts of income coming in, this was part of the reason why I was so passionate about keeping my blog up over the years and my YouTube, because that ends up not being something that feels like a non-compete with companies because it's a travel blog. But the reality is I can put Amazon affiliate links and affiliate links to hotels and tours that I go on. And I can do the same thing on YouTube, and you also could join the partner program. So when you are just starting out, you make very small sums of money, but I think about it as a compound interest kind of investment, where that library of content compounds over time. And all of a sudden, I'm starting really making no money, but now I'm at a point where I'm making maybe, $100 a month on affiliate links for hotels. And I'm making probably 60 pounds a month on YouTube. And I have 1,300 subscribers on YouTube. It's not a big channel, but that's going to grow over time. And I'll be so excited because what I've noticed, because YouTube is also search. So if you're someone who knows a skill, whether it's related to your work or not, and you can create content that is very search engine friendly and you can get monetized on YouTube, that content doesn't just last for a month or 6 months. I find sometimes I get disappointed, like, oh, that video only had 50 views. That really bombed. Then a year later, it has 2,000 views. So it just compounds over time. And then all of a sudden you realize, well, actually now I've made a bit of money on that, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So those are the things I think if you do want to future proof, and then you don't feel that gap as much when the job ends.
Yeah. And I think you're so spot on when you say it's compounding. I think it is compounding. Yesterday, just the other day, I had a conversation on the podcast about someone who said something similar in that reputation it takes a long time to build and then a short time to tarnish that. If you mess up. And I think you've helped so many companies tell their stories very well, in addition to your own. But I'm curious, and I know I'm going off on a tangent a little bit here, but I'm curious, how do you view the value of personal branding from a company standpoint? Because a lot of the companies, they're not founder-led. Like Dunkin Donuts, I don't actually think many people know the founder of Dunkin, or the CEO rather. Nokia, same thing. At what point do you think it's really important to build a personal brand? Like, I guess we can measure it in total revenue for a company.
Sure.
And then at one point do you say, we need to become faceless?
So are you asking the question in the sense of like, I'm an employee who works at a business, or I'm the founder of a business?
You're a founder. Yeah, you're a founder.
So if you're a founder, when you are launching your business, your founding story is one of the most powerful stories you can tell. So in our book, in our most recent book, The Laws of Brand Storytelling, we talk about macro versus micro stories as a very easy way to teach storytelling. And macro stories are your why, your founding mission. And micro stories we look at as the lifeblood of your storytelling strategy. So you think about that as like content pillars of your business. So that allows you to go deeper into different areas of the business that you want to tell stories around. But the key with those micro stories is they have to tie into that macro story. So if they don't align with your why, your mission, your vision, your values, they're not going to be believable to the end customer. And as a result, they're not going to resonate. So I think as a founder, you have to really nail that founding story. And then as your businesses, as you go through different areas of growth and scale, you can modify it a bit, but the origin stories will never change. Even with Dunkin Donuts, Dunkin started at 1950 in Quincy, Massachusetts. And that is still a story the business tells. There's a reason why hashtag TBT or Throwback Thursday or FBF Flashback Friday, that still exists. People still have a fascination for the nostalgia and the old days, even if you've been in business for 50 or 100 years. Mm-hmm. But then, for a founder, I think the question then becomes, as you're growing and scaling, do you plan on staying in your business forever? So that's where you also want to think about the founding story is very important. You want to make sure as you get into more of those micro stories, that's going to have longevity for the business if you do decide that you want to step away from the business at some point. So really thinking about, okay, you're in business for a reason. Why is that? What are your unique differentiators? What are the use cases for your products? What is the end state that it's helping people do, whether it's B2B or B2C? And that's where you can build some anchor stories. But then you can also just allow for the serendipity where sometimes amazing things happen that you can't predict. And those could be things like two people met in line at Dunkin' and they got married and they had kids and they told us about the story and maybe we wanted to celebrate them. Or another one that happened, which was customers started doing something called paying it forward in the drive-through. So you imagine this, you pull up to the drive-through window to pay for your coffee and breakfast sandwich, and the car in front of you is already paid for it. And you would be like, amazing. Oh my gosh, it's the most amazing feeling. But then you have a decision. Do you want to do that for the person behind you? Or do you just want to accept the gesture and move on with your day? And what we found was happening was a lot of people were keeping the chain going. So when we hear about those stories, that ties into the macro story of America runs on Dunkin', keeping busy people on the go running. But when you think about maybe the content pillars of the business about talking about new menu items, talking about the quality of the food and beverages, it might not fit into the cookie cutter micro stories, but it is something really fun. And on the B2B side, this could be these, incredible cases of transformation, right? With B2B, case studies and showing the different ways customers use the products is important. But you might have this 1% story, or maybe someone who's such a crazy super fan or company that's such a crazy super fan that you do something above and beyond for that customer and you capture that story. Those will be kind of some of the things that people take note on and say, wow, this is a company I want to do business with because they care about their customers.
So true. Yeah. And I love that. I love how you frame it as the macro micro, because I talk within, I think personal branding is very similar to like corporate branding. It's just done on a personal level. You've got the macro pillars and then micro pillars. And we always apply a cadence to them. So we're going to talk about these micro pillars, this amount of time, percentage, and try to aim for that so that everyone can run together.
And that's great because then you can test and learn, because you can apply the same principle as an individual, and you can also test and learn on those pillars and see what's resonating. And you can try different ways, like different hooks, different formats of telling the story, because I find sometimes clients of mine will say, oh, but that micro pillar doesn't really work for me. But I'm like, well, we need to test that format, like the different formats, the different hooks, the different image versus video, maybe blog post, podcast. Let's try different formats in telling those stories and see if there's really a specific way that moves the needle more than others. And then before we abandon that pillar and go on to something else. And I think as well, when you are looking at those pillars, even just doing some listening on what are people asking you about, what are the questions, if you're a B2B, what is your sales team being asked when they're in these meetings? That's a really good way to mine for those kind of pillars and content as well.
Yeah, I think you have to be listening equally, if not more, than you are speaking.
Yeah. And one thing as well I didn't talk about was around, when you said like, yes, as the founder, when do you build a personal brand? I think as well, expanding on that. So whether you're the founder or an employee of a business, another very important trend is employee advocacy. So we see this from the founder all the way down to the other employees. So it's just a fancy industry term for getting your employees to talk about what they're doing in their jobs. And it's thought leadership from employees. But some companies will build formal programs around it where they train, they coach employees, because a lot of employees have a fear of saying the wrong thing. They don't want to reveal trade secrets.
Yeah.
They also want to make sure they're creating compelling content. So research shows, and LinkedIn's done a lot of research on this, and this is depressing for the brand side folks of us, but employees actually have so much higher of a reach and engagement on their content than the brand pages. So this is
100%.
why,
yes.
yeah, this is why companies, and this is why you see LinkedIn exploding with content where people will share, I was in a meeting this week and this kind of topic came up and this is what I learned from it. This is a way of building your personal brand and professional brand. But companies increasingly want to put different pillar topics out. And you see a lot of it because there's a tool called Disseminate where you can actually pre-populate content for employees to disseminate on LinkedIn. Great branding of the company name.
Great product.
And I think the key there is to have a very big wealth of content they can pick from, so it doesn't feel so like you're spamming LinkedIn with the same post over and over again. I think the superpower is for the kind of work you do, where you could actually go into a company, you could host workshops, coach, train, empower employees, and even help film the video content. So they have specific, for certain key employees, they have those thought leadership programs. So the founder has their program, their kind of thought leadership pillars and program, but then different subject matter experts, maybe they're the head of engineering, they're the chief marketing officer, different key thought leaders, the kind of the chief revenue officer, the way that they're thinking about the business and thinking about topics in their industry and the work that they're doing is like, that's what people want to learn from. They want to learn from real people who are in the trenches every day, who can say, this is something we tried or failed, or this is what we learned. And that's the content people want to see.
I'm so glad you said that. And I think, I know this hurts, but I think brand pages are almost dead, especially on LinkedIn. I would argue maybe not so much. If they're doing a really good job and the brand's entertaining, it's fun to follow, they're still there. And those are, I would say, probably more of the consumer brands. Yeah. But now that shift I think you're right, the shift has pushed down to the executive team, the founding team, the employees of the organization, because, and maybe I'd love to hear what you think about this. I feel like trust is at an all-time low.
Yeah.
And so if the employees are speaking about it, they're not, I think the theory is that they're being honest about it. They're being authentic. They're truly speaking. It's the same as if you hear a testimonial from a customer. I'm going to listen to that over what the brand is saying. Yeah. Do you think there's any truth to that? And then how do people, I think you already answered it, but what do you think? Is it a lack of trust?
I think it is the trusted piece. Well, it's twofold. I think on the brand side, my one criticism of a lot of companies, especially B2B companies on social media, is that they get more in the sales material level of content marketing. And I think it's, even when I was working in B2B, because I worked at Sprinklr, what I was really pushing is that we need to do case studies that really teach people something. If the content is useful and it really teaches someone something, whether it's a video, a blog post, a LinkedIn post, people will respond to it. So that's the first piece. Yep. But the second piece is, yes, people do get excited by employees because they're looking at, well, maybe would I want to work at this company? Do people really seem to love working there? And then also if employees that are subject matter experts are teaching from their perspective, that's also quite engaging. And then the third pillar, actually, that we haven't gotten to yet, that's also, it's bigger in the consumer space, but it's growing massively in B2B, are influencers. So subject matter experts who are third parties. So folks like you and I that are maybe not tied to a brand, but we have a real specialty and thought leadership platform. Companies are increasingly wanting to work with folks like us to then say, if you're a specialist in content marketing or video production, what are the tools that you use? Why do you use them? So sharing your testimonial, your story, that's the next frontier. And the reason why, even though influencers are paid, influencers don't want to work with companies that they don't believe in, because if they mislead their audience, they're going to lose their audience.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's the same piece of
Audience
pillars. So I
overall.
think you're going to see that skyrocket massively in B2B. But the caveat is it's a lot harder to find in B2B because there's not as many folks that are in that influencer space in B2B.
I think a lot of B2B companies struggle with that because it's who is an influencer for this, for a company doing B2B, right? I think influencer is easier to understand from a B2C perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And when I've built affiliate teams for companies, it's all been B2C. And the best affiliates were the most authentic and real to their audiences. And what is it or fit? What you just said is, I just wanted to highlight that, is so important. But then when you step into the B2B realm, I think it becomes a little more difficult to find the right influencers because it's so new, maybe. But I'm really glad you said that. And I think you're talking about so many great pillars, and I want to get into your work.
Sure.
So transition to the laws of brand storytelling.
Okay.
So what is the core thesis that everyone needs to know? And then how do you distill it down to someone who hasn't read it?
So The Laws of Brand Storytelling is our second book, and it goes much deeper into how to build a storytelling strategy for your company. So we wrote the book in laws. There's 30 laws, but there are 6 essentially kind of chapter subsections. And what those kind of 6 chapter subsections do is they take you on this journey where we start with kind of the protagonist laws, the strategy laws, story making laws, channel laws, and also engagement laws. So it's kind of taking you through all the pieces that would comprise a brand story. Essentially, we frame it with the macro and micro stories, which we spoke about. But then we teach you how, like, those frameworks and how to go through your business to understand. You have to be grounded in your brand mission or why, your vision, your values. Storytelling is not a Band-Aid to fix what's wrong with your company or your products and services.
Yes.
A lot of times companies look at it that way, but if the products and services are not good, then the stories that we're telling to get people excited about them and to bring them down that marketing funnel, it's not going to work. So we really go deep on that in the book, like no BS, like tell it like it is on. If there are problems with your company, actually documenting the journey of the customer feedback and fixing them can be a powerful way to rebuild trust in that environment. Mm-hmm. And that's the piece. So we really break down every element of how to build that strategy for your company, but then we go into how to craft a great story, what makes a great story, the different types of stories companies can tell. And then we also go into things like engagement, because if you're just posting a story, but you're not driving engagement around it, it's like a tree falling in the forest with no one around to see it.
No one is hearing it.
Yeah. And you're just shouting into the void.
I think a lot of people, when they're trying to build their LinkedIn, have that frustration. Like, is anyone even watching?
People want to see results overnight.
All right. So, Jess, in your book, you talk about brands not being able to be Switzerland anymore.
Yes.
And so they can't stay neutral. Where do founders and companies get this most wrong? And then what does playing it too safe actually cost them?
Yeah. So we talk about the joke of brands cannot be Switzerland, which is really just a joke around saying you can't be neutral anymore because Switzerland is the country that is characteristically neutral in times of conflict. And the argument that we make is that neutral brands are invisible brands. And the way to think about it now is there's never been more competition for consumer attention.
Okay.
So consumers are faced with more messages across more channels than ever before. And that's one of the reasons why storytelling matters. When you're scrolling on social media or you're looking at which podcasts you want to follow or a blog post you want to read, stories is what actually hooks you in, but it pulls you into it, especially that visual. That's why we wrote our first book on visual storytelling, because in a scroll-inducing environment, the visual is what hooks you and pulls you in.
Hook. Yeah.
Yeah, images are processed much faster than text, which is the way our brains are hardwired. But our brains are also hardwired to favor storytelling. This actually goes back into the neuroscience of storytelling. So we as humans are, our brains are hardwired with like dopamine or mirroring or the neural cortex in our brain. It's basically the sensory cortex that allows you to feel, hear, taste, smell a story. So what we argue is that we know that humans are hardwired to favor storytelling. But if you're just telling these blah vanilla stories in this image saturated environment, you are not going to stand out. So you have to really lean into what your differentiators are, what makes you special. Those one of a kind stories like the pay it forward in the drive through, or the crazy one, like crazy kind of unique use case that happened that, you know, you think could pave the way for more use cases like that. In the era of AI, make some bold statements and predictions.
Yeah.
Now, you did mention, obviously, there could be some tricky things to think about with that, where, you know, the idea that this is predicated on is that culture moves quickly. And because there's this sea of safe content, people will tune into something that has that strong hook that pulls them in, but they'll only stay if the hook delivers. The one thing you have to be careful about, especially where we see consumer brands getting in trouble, like Duolingo's a good example where they're always on the pace of culture. They're looking for what the trends are. But sometimes if you Google Duolingo crisis, a lot of crazy things will come up where they've kind of crossed the line and pushed things way too far. And for every viral success they've had, they've also had a couple of viral failures as well. So where you look at where the line is when you're thinking, oh my gosh, I want to jump on this trending topic, or I want to make this hot but controversial prediction in my industry, that's where we go back to our macro stories and our why. If you do the work in grounding around your mission, your vision, your values, in the book, we actually call this an authenticity playbook. So this comes back to my PR grounding, where this is where you have this, every company has brand guidelines, right? You know your values, your why. Take it a step further and build an authenticity playbook in those guidelines. Start to think about the issues of the day and the issues in your industry, or the hot topics in your industry. What's the controversial hot potato you don't want to touch? But where are the areas that maybe fuels into a unique selling point or a unique differentiator that you do want to have a slightly controversial hot take on, because that's key to selling your software or your solution? That's where you need to play. And an example I will share with you is I've worked for a couple companies in the sports supplement space, and this is just such a saturated industry. And the clients that I've had that have been more successful really lean into that one niche area that really differentiates their product versus trying to spray the ocean, being like, be healthy, work out, eat well, take your supplements. Yeah, we know we have to do that. But actually, if you lean into something saying, well, actually, do you know what's in your supplements? Do you know most of them have all these nasty products? And this is why we manufacture at like these very specific facilities, and we do rigorous testing. And you kind of put the industry on red and say, this is where the areas, like there's a bunch of junk and things in your protein powder that you don't want. Ours aren't designed that way. That's a motivation to say, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was a thing, and that's why I want to go with you instead. And so having that hot take and not being Switzerland actually is the thing, especially if you are a startup that's trying to have that point of differentiation in the market, is really critical. Now, you don't need to be constantly you don't need to be Wendy's on Twitter and constantly like tearing people down and doing all these wild things, but figure out how to do that within your brand tone and your brand voice. And that's how you'll build that community more.
Yeah, you need a unique perspective. You need to take a stand. And I think a lot of people are afraid that they might offend certain people. But I think it comes with the territory. I think you need to, when you're talking about brand storytelling, you need to be serving someone. Like you are, as either a personal brand or the company, ever the hero of the story, right? We've all learned that. And I think in that, what you just said, to just highlight that, I think people need to understand who they're really serving and what's important to them. And that plays back to your why, and then staying true to that. And I think if you offend people while you're doing that, they're not your customer anyway. So it's okay.
Yeah, there's an interesting one that's playing out in real time right now, where there's a baby care company called Frida, and they have a very bold marketing strategy where they made a whole Mardi Gras float of you-know-whats, and showing them and showing like, this is what real, especially after you've had a baby and you've been breastfeeding, this is the reality. And
that is bold.
They've had some very kind of slightly sexual campaigns, more than slightly. And there's been actually an uprising of some people that have said, how dare you? This is really offensive. Like, you are not the business for me. And one thing we say in the book is your vibe attracts your tribe. So usually when you do have negative backlash online, okay, so I pioneered this when I was at Dunkin, it was just more me taking the piss, which is a British way for saying making fun. But I called it the CTFD index, where it was like calm the F down index, because anytime there's negativity with the brand, especially if you're in a big company, everyone freaks out. But then what you have to do is you have to quantify the freak out. So is this just like 5 posts on social media, or is it like, if it's a negative news article in the Wall Street Journal and that's going to spark a lot of negative backlash as a result, okay, freak out.
You can freak out.
If it's 5 posts or 50 posts and you can benchmark it around like what your normal conversation volume would be. So every time we'd have a negative piece of feedback at Dunkin Donuts or a brand crisis, we would benchmark what would be from news media, social media, customer service. We would quantify what that would look like. So then I could go back the next time something happened and would be like, okay, guys, on the CTFD index, we're at a 10 or we're at a 1. Like, where in the index should we care about this? Like, okay, we should care about this, or okay, this is something we should be monitoring. Medium threat level assessment. So you don't have to use swear words. You could do like green, yellow, red as well if you want to keep it more politically correct. Yeah. But I did it that way more just to have a joke, because we were a much more funny, jovial culture inside. That's so cool. When I introduced it, people it was a way to kind of cut the edge down on some of the negative things, saying, well, guys, on my index, this is where I think it is, and here's why, but feel free to challenge me and tell me if you think we should care more.
I love that. And I think it's so helpful for teams who are looking to be grounded in what's actually happening. I want to take it into a different, take the conversation a little differently, because today, at least in my bubble, AI is the story of everything. I think it's a massive wave and the adoption rate is through the roof. A lot of people are complaining about AI slop on LinkedIn, sounding like everybody else. How are you navigating AI, and what are you telling founding teams or marketing teams today when it comes to AI and brand storytelling?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm excited about AI.
Yeah,
and I last year, we had the very first South by Southwest in London. And I heard Demis, who's the CEO of Google DeepMind, speak. And on stage, he literally said, no joke, AI is not going to replace the storytellers. And then I ran into him in the speaker lounge. And then I ran up to him and was like, I have questions. So
there's more companies now hiring roles for storytellers.
He was really lovely to me and humored me with my questions. But essentially what we were talking about, and this is my thesis as well, I was really happy to hear him assess that. AI is at its infancy right now. And when we think about some of the greatest creatives in the world and the greatest storytellers, AI is at a point where it's all about how you prompt it. And a lot of times what it will give you is kind of an average. So if you are a company that's resource light and you can start to learn certain storytelling frameworks, it's something that can help you as a brainstorming buddy evolve around your journey. But what I would say to people is, don't just do a prompt and take the first thing. You need to challenge it. You need to make sure you can even ask it, like, what other information could I be providing you that would give me a better output here? And start to work at it more in a back and forth. And I think when people get excited about AI, they just think, oh, I'm going to snap my fingers in 30 seconds or 1 minute and it will just do the work. But the reality is the more that you go back and forth with it and teach it about your business, coach it, have it learn your tone of voice. I mean, I do a weekly newsletter. I absolutely use AI in doing it, but I am constantly pushing AI with my prompting. It never gives me a first draft of the newsletter that's good enough. I am constantly having to go back and say, remember my writing rules, or remember like this insight is actually really what's interesting about this. And I want to go in X, Y, and Z topics. And having that back and forth, I can still produce something much faster than if I had to write everything from scratch. It still requires that. And really on the point of great storytellers and great creatives, AI is not at the point where like the weird and wonderful places that our brains go to it's just not there yet in terms of being trained. It has to work with us to get there. So yes, if you are a founder, something I'm playing around with doing probably some online products on and workshops and courses, maybe even a book on, is really using some of the work I do when I'm working with companies and getting the prompting to a point where you could take the prompts from me and go through the checklist of the work that I would do and who I would talk to and the questions I would ask. But the problem is it still stops short of that human intuition, where if I'm interviewing 10 different people from a company for some storytelling consultancy work, I'm going to be feeding off of what they say, and my set list of questions might change as we go and evolve. And that's where AI is not quite as intuitive yet, but I think it's going to get there.
Yeah. And you had wrote, I think recently, that AI opposing weak strategy rather than replacing storytellers.
Yeah. So it's the folks that essentially, like, it's about that average piece. So if you're just like, write me a blog post or write me this, yes, it can do that, but it's just giving you average, and it can give you mediocre content. So the risk for companies is that if you don't know, if you're not grounded in who you are, what you stand for, your tone of voice, really kind of what those macro and micro stories are that you want to tell, that's where AI, it's exposing a weak strategy. It can also put you in a direction that maybe you don't want to go in as a business. So you have to treat it with caution, I would say. But on the flip side, yes, it can help you grow and scale in a way that wasn't possible before.
Absolutely. I view it still as an AI human sandwich. Was human, AI, human. So you've got to
like that.
do all the work up front with it, prompting, strategic insights, training, and then it can do a lot of the grunt work. And then it's like you still need a human at the end of that to polish it up and make sure it makes sense.
And I think one of the things that I continuously see is, like, when I get into a company and I get under the hood in marketing right now, because I'm doing fractional chief marketing officer work, companies come in and all they want is growth. Because right now the role of marketing is changing so much, and marketing is really quickly becoming more of a sales extension and function. And I don't disagree with that. We as marketers have to be grounded in the commercial goals and output of the business. But a lot of times when companies say they want a growth marketer or they just want to focus on growth, they're not realizing that companies have built decades of brand equity to be at that growth stage. So you still do have to invest in your brand, and you also have to invest in that narrative architecture of your brand. And that's just a fancy way for saying the stories that you tell, the messaging that you put out, the consistency of that across channels, and also understanding, are the messages that you're putting out, whether it's an piece of ad copy or a blog post or social media content, is that going to be the thing that hooks people and motivates them to buy the product or service? So if you're just going to AI saying, I need to design stuff to sell more, it will write you a lot of salesy copy or make you a salesy story. But if you don't have that narrative architecture really mastered or get into this test and learn structure, I think I received a pitch the other day from a company that actually looks really cool, and I won't name names, but there's so many of them now. It's an AI company that can just produce reams and reams of ad creative at scale. So images, video assets. They're like, hey, for a consumer brand, we'll just make you thousands of ads. And I wrote back to them and said, hey, I love what you're doing. I think this is really cool. But the thing that I find is, before I scale to the thousands of ads to test and learn, you need to do that narrative architecture work. And are you hearing any of that from your clients? And I got no response back saying that maybe there's a partnership opportunity there. I don't think they liked the sales pitch back, but it was more of a curiosity question, because, I've worked in these fast moving consumer goods industries. And yes, when you think about upper, mid, and lower funnel ad creative, a lot of that is born in storytelling. And this is where you need to think about the messages at different stages of the funnel and the brand that you're building to get that biggest conversion. It's not just about if something goes viral on social media, whether it's from your brand or from a creator that sells a huge amount of product, you have to lean into why that worked and what does that mean for the bigger narrative strategy of your business. So I think that is also the danger of AI and the mediocrity, is it can make you 100 and 1,000 different ad variations, but if you're not having that loop cycle in doing that, in that test and learn piece, it could actually undermine your business a bit longer term.
Entirely. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of danger in that if you're not doing the narrative architecture, as you mentioned, and you're
Yeah.
just creating noise. And
Yeah. So and
people are
that's
going to
the
drown
thing
you.
is like, I find this funny when I'm like, I don't get as nearly as many pings for storytelling work as I do like growth marketing work. But essentially, so much of the work I do once I'm in there as a growth marketer is actually storytelling,
Yeah.
branding driven work to do the growth,
People complain.
which is wild.
I hear
It,
people
it,
complain.
it has a branding problem.
That's exactly it. So I've worked with so many companies and they're like, we're putting out tons of content, but it's not working. And
Yeah.
it's really it's a branding problem because you're not attracting your ICP. Something is off in the messaging. I couldn't agree with you more. All right, rapid fire close. This is the fun rapid fire round. You can skip, you can just quick
Okay,
answers.
cool.
So first question, one piece of personal brand advice every founder needs to know right now.
Ooh, I would say reputation compounds. Start earlier than you think you need to.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I love that. Okay, the worst brand storytelling mistake you've seen companies make.
Oh gosh, talking about the company instead of the customer. I know, controversial.
Okay. That's great.
Ultimately, it's about the customers and what your product or service does for them. But a lot of times we as companies want to talk about ourselves. That's the hot controversial take.
That's true. So true. Okay, the biggest lie people have told themselves about why they can't build their own personal brand.
Oh, I think it's two things. One is I don't have time, and two, it's imposter syndrome and the fear of the judgment.
Yeah, it's real. That's very real. The best book you've read recently, other than your own, so we can't do that, but any other books you would recommend, business or otherwise?
There's one I quite liked, which is called Jerks at Work. And it breaks down the psychology of like the different types of people you find in the workplace. So whether you're in-house at a company or you're a consultant working with lots of companies, really good to understand the psychology of these different types of people to work more effectively with them, because you'll never not work with difficult people, but how you manage it will make it so much easier for you.
That's great. And then last question. Someone starting from zero today, they've listened to this and they want to start a personal brand. What is one platform, one content format, and one habit that they can start? So what are your three you would recommend to them?
Okay, I would recommend starting with LinkedIn for a personal brand. That's the most important. I would start with short insight posts. This is where you could even brainstorm with AI, start talking to it about your career, upload your CV, get some ideas and turn it into just a short snackable post and start to find your voice a bit.
Okay.
I think actually even voice dictating is really good in that sense. And then the habit would be just to aim to do one post a week and just share something you're learning weekly, document versus focusing overly on creating.
That's really good. All right. So for everyone listening, that's it. That's the playbook. Get out there and start building your personal brand. Jess, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me on the show. For everyone who has listened, where can they find you? What's the best place to reach out to you? Is it LinkedIn?
So I can LinkedIn for sure. And I would love it if you subscribe to my newsletter, The Marketer's Storybook, which you can find on LinkedIn or Substack. Okay. And I have jessicagioglio.com. If you can spell my last name, you could go on there as well. And I do
I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah,
I share everything I do on LinkedIn with my blog posts as well. So LinkedIn would be probably the easiest place if that's a channel you enjoy. If not, you can go hop on my blog.
Cool. All right. We'll make sure to link that in there. Jess, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations on all of your success too.
Thanks.